The numbers from the USDA WASDE report are going to be discussed with Jerry Gidel, and also we are going to talk about this week's that has ended with positive numbers only for wheat. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Hello, Jerry. How are you today? We are going to start with the WASDE's numbers. I think I don't buy that South American corn production will not be reduced further.
Well, I tend to agree with you there that that's a scenario that those numbers probably are not going to, at this point at least, the corn side of things, the weather has definitely not been positive, and various South American sources have some problem. Right at this point, we're still a little. We haven't seen anything specifically from various projection people like ConAb or IAMP, the Mato Grosso people at this point. But the interesting twist on the corn right now is that we've got this very unusual situation going on in Ukraine, where we've got a lot of bushels and supplies stuck in the country there. And there's some people talking about as high as 25 million metric tons of corn, soybeans, I suppose throw some sunflowers in there too, and barley that haven't been able to get out of the country. There's been some exports that have been moved by rail, and then there's even actually been one or two ships possibly loaded at the Danube River. But in general, now the other twist of it is that they're kind of optimistic that this year's wheat crop, which is winter wheat crop, was planted last fall, and that in the weather we've had during an important month of April there, with kind of cool conditions and lots of moisture, maybe help the Ukrainians slow down the Russian invasion, but at the same time, it also probably produced a pretty good sized crop. So now there's all kinds of worries about the storage capabilities over there and where people are going to be able to work with it. Right now, though, it looks like that this particular conflict is going to continue on into the summer. So there's going to be some issues here about how this is all going to get worked out, and how much exports can occur, and how much a crop size they can produce with potentially some limited chemical and fertilizer capabilities this year. But overall, the one thing that I think is really important here is that the U.S. Corn stocks probably are going to see some reduction on old crop, and with the USDA's plan intentions here of 89 million, we're going to keep this coming year's carryover stock pretty tight too. I'm carrying a number at below 1.2. I know that the average trade gas here on carryover stock for next year is it looks like it's at 1.35 billion bushels, which is still at or below kind of the numbers we're at for this year. So weather is going to continue to be a very, very important factor going forward.
Yes, and what about the delay in the US planting?
Well, that's another interesting question. There's lots of, I think that's the other part of the reason why corn and soybeans were kind of on a defensive this week. There's all these people looking at this coming week's, whatever you want to say, U.S. weather situation, and it's going to be much improved. There's no doubt about it. If you wanted to be really from Omaha to Columbus here in the U.S., it was kind of overcast, cold, damp, rains at times. really modest, very modest type of plantings occurred. There were some plantings that jumped in, and we had a jump in our 14% this last week. But I'm not even sure we're going to even get up to 30% this week. Usually, you kind of accelerate your plantings at this time of year. We had 7% last week from 7 to 14. A lot of people think it's going to be 30. And then maybe on the ones on Monday, and maybe even seeing 50 or 60%. There's the people out there throwing that number around. I am very cautious about that opportunity coming along, primarily because the fact that the conditions uh, this week where it was wet and cold, you just don't get over that after one day of 80-degree temperatures. It takes a couple days, and that limits the total number of opportunities that you're going to be able to get to 50%. And that really is kind of the middle of at the low end of expectations to get a good yield. 50% is adequate, but it doesn't tell you that, like last year at this time in the middle of May, we were 70, 75%, which is when we have an opportunity for good yields, is when we put corn and soybeans in early, and corn usually comes in before beans. So that's the reason why we kind of quote those corn numbers initially.
Yes, and what do you think is playing out to explain that corn and soybeans are not following the wheat trend? Because we are seeing higher energy prices, but anyway, the markets are going down.
You're exactly right. This has been a kind of a head scratcher. I think it's a combination of the general positioning of many of the investors here, and the fact that we've had a defensive week in the stock market. In that we did have our first 50 basis point jump in U.S. interest rates in the middle of the week, and I think that we had some defensive reactions there. And sometimes what happens in that world when you have these big institutional funds that are played both in the stock market and in the corn and the commodity markets, they sometimes decide that they'd rather end up holding on to the stocks they know are going up versus those commodities that you never know, they're always going to go against me type of attitude. And I think there was some of that going on. Plus, as I mentioned right off this week, is there's been an optimism about next week's plannings, just all of a sudden healing the world here in the U.S. Yes, we're going to have higher plannings, but I'm not sure whether we're off to the and there's been different theories that this is supposed to be a major change in the trend in the U.S. Weather situations, and that some of the private weather people are also pointing out that yes, La Nina might be slightly waning, but at the same time, they're quite concerned that the high pressure ridge could develop here yet and starting in late May and June. And all of a sudden, we have a high pressure ridge just east of the Rocky Mountains, and that really then starts to have a factor here. Surprisingly, I think the one thing that also caught us a little off guard was wheat strength. I think there has been people that have been long corn and short wheat. And interestingly enough, the forecast last week was for a lot of the Southwest to get a pretty beneficial rain. And there was some rains in Wichita, Kansas. There was some rains up towards Topeka, but it wasn't a lot further west in Kansas, and it wasn't a lot further west in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma. And actually, of all things, the Oklahoma Wheat Commission put out a number this week of 57 million bushels. That'd be about half of what they produced last year. Now, I think maybe they've had a bounce back in some of the rains they had this week, but I'm kind of surprised that the markets was willing to, in essence, liquidate their long wheat and their long corn and soybeans against short wheat. But that's what it looks like happened this week because we didn't get the rains in the Southwest. While the expectations are that it's going to dry out and everybody's going to get in the field and we're going to be back to normal here in less than 10 days.
And how do you think the U.S. farmer can position in the market with possible higher, maybe much higher interest rates, stronger dollar, and so far stronger wheat prices.
Well, interestingly enough, I think that the concerns and really the U.S. dollar, I think, has been one of the factors why the U.S. export activity has been quiet, and anticipate that yes, that we're probably going to have the USDA take down their export number again here this month, uh, right ahead of their oh 1st of June stocks reports, and that I'm kind of looking for 20 million or so. Now I know that there's some other individual exports that are not on the uh, uh, excuse me, on the export shipments from the ports and that, but at the same time, I really feel like that the U.S. dollar is going to be a factor on us. But I guess interestingly enough, the impact of what might happen and what it looks like it's going to happen, I should say, in the Black Sea and the reduction of output, so much in that part. Well, and the other one interesting that probably impacted the wheat this week was the back and forth situation in India from the fact that we had different ideas from the Indian government about they've had a pretty significant heat wave over there as the harvest is about ready to get, well, it has been going and it has been impacting their crop, and so there's been some theory that they should be banning it and not have any exports this year because of the need for their people, and that they have had 5 years though of really good production. So I sense that that's not going to be the case. There might be some slowdown there on that, but in general, it looks like that India is still going to look to see if they can expand their export capabilities, and they've actually sent some test shipments to Turkey and Egypt and places like that to see if they can get some interest in buying their wheat. The the corn and soybean situation, and that I think uh, to some extent the market was maybe vulnerable because we had made some moves towards the recent highs in the soybeans and didn't get there in wheat. Corn did make a new high in that, but not by a lot. And I think that there you just kind of run into a little bit of fatigue at times in the markets. I think that's what might have happened this week, but we're going to continue to be highly sensitized to what's going on with this year's planting situations and that in the U.S. We get this crop in behind schedule the way it looks like right now in corn and soybeans. And also, at this point at least, our exports on soybeans looks like they're going to help keep this expanded plantings for the coming year reduced. Right now, I'm only anticipating next year's crops carry over to be about 250 to maybe 270 at the worst. The trade average guess is over 300 there on new crop, but at this point, if there's any kind of further reduction in Brazil, and I know that there's anticipation that the coming year there's going to be plenty of expanded plantings. The one thing, though, that as you well know, there in South America, the need for fertilization for soybeans is maybe not a classic nitrogen fertilizer that you need for soybeans, but you need the potash, you need the potassium, that type of thing, and that's still way up, a lot of up in the air on that situation. And you wonder if you might have a few more acres being planted, but you're probably not going to have the best yield. Even here in the U.S., I think there's some of that same situation happening here where people are kind of stretching their ingredients out because they're very, very high and expensive this time. And that could end up meaning that even with higher plantings in the U.S., we might not see 51 and a half, 52 bushel yield. Not to say we're going to 46, but at the same time, 49 and a half, 50 bushels is not something impossible that could happen, particularly if the La Nina continues to be a major impact on the U.S. weather. It has been an impact on South America this year, and it still looks like there's going to be some impact on Mato Grosso's corn output this year. And I think that's the one thing that's we both kind of looking at that could be 4 or 5 million less than what the 116 million that the kind of had last month. And boy, that's going to be a big factor in maybe impacting the world here on corn, particularly since we don't have a lot of corn coming out of Ukraine.
Yes, and one advice I think we could agree that is that farmers could anticipate their purchases around the world, but if there is supply of these inputs.
Oh, I think the input issues are going to impact everybody. South America is going to impact it first because they're from the standpoint of this next cycle, because of the plantings you'll be doing this fall, and that. And the one tricky thing about people have got to remember here is that once this Black Sea situation gets settled one way or the other, all of a sudden they stop fighting, and all of a sudden the Russians have one side of Ukraine, and the Ukraine is open on the other side. That's being a stalemate type situation. I don't think that the world is going to be out there buying a lot of Belarus or Russian fertilizer and energy and all this other stuff. That situation has really changed here. The cooperation between Europe and Russia about energy and fertilizers and all this other stuff, major change in attitude. And boy, I'm not sure any of us know where that's going at this point. It's going to be a factor. How do we plug this into our price activity going forward? But in general, I'd say that you don't want to plan on yields going straight up, and you don't want to plan on the recent export trends and flows are going to stay anywhere close to where they were in the past. We're guessing somewhat in the next 6 months to a year, going to be entering a whole different world on agricultural trading.
So, other than the US weather, what are you watching next week?
Well, the weather scenarios, we're going to be, of course, seeing how quickly people get back in the field and all that type of thing. I'm kind of anticipating that the corn planting number is going to be 12 up, something like that. We've got 26, 27%, which is going the right direction. There's some people that got some stuff in before these rains happened and that, but a lot of people still were looking at very cold temperatures or cold soil temperatures. Soybeans, boy, we're just going to move along at probably a modest level there. And that, I think the key question is how quickly we can get things kind of rolling to get back above getting back towards trend. I'd have to say right now that next week's number, let's just say a good example, we had 26% this Monday, and all of a sudden we got 20% the coming week. And that's really kind of pushing it, considering the fact that a lot of places, have still had some issues for a few days. And that, well, 20% on 20% increase on 26 is only 46. That's still going to keep us behind the minimum level. And we've had higher numbers, as we mentioned before, over 70% here by the 15th of May. So I think the world is going to start to come back to look at the fundamentals of the U.S. crop and how it's working, and also get an idea on a general idea of where we're going for 2022-23. The USDA is going to have to come up with some numbers next Thursday. I don't know that anybody should etch them in stone, as that they're, I don't know that USDA wants to say that either. It's one of the more difficult transitions that we're going to come up with here going forward into the 22-23 crop year, because of the fact there are so many balls in the air. This is going to make it a very difficult situation to, or at least assume that once you make a projection that it's going to be exactly on target, because there's a lot of things that could still impact both things in the Black Sea, what could happen in South America, what can happen in the Southern Plains, what can happen in the Midwest. And why not? Let's just throw China in there too, because they're still in there having to figure out what they want to do with their hogs and their output of grain here for the 2022-23 year. So I guess hang on to your hat, huh?
We'll be here next Friday.
Yes, we will. Have a good weekend.